Today I want to show you how to put this HiSense HRB171N6 into forced defrost mode, show you the error codes that could show up on the UI that could tell you what's wrong potentially with the unit, and then the last thing we're going to do is test some of the functions from the control board and be able to diagnose some of the advanced problems without even having to take the refrigerator apart. And then I may show you how to get into the fridge too, because of how easy it is to get into to fix. So just so you know, this is what it's going to look like on the inside with the display panel up the top. That's what we're going to deal with in this video. There may be other models other than this one single top door that have this UI. The codes and modes may work for that too, but I can't say that for certain, so let's get to it. To start and perform the forced defrost, it has to be done within the first 10 minutes of plugging the refrigerator in. So if you've had it plugged in for a while, unplug it, wait 30 seconds, and then plug it back in. To start the forced defrost command, open up the door of your HiSense refrigerator, locate the controls at the very top after it's been booted up, then locate the zone and temperature buttons on the controls. Press and hold both of them at the same time for about 3 to 5 seconds. It should be this easy, and the screen will flash off and on, and then the letters DF will appear on the control. From here, the unit's going to start the forced defrost mode. It will turn the compressor off as well as any of the fans and then run the mode. This will run for 20 to 30 minutes depending on how much ice is behind the freezer panel. It's going to run silently without any beeps or anything from the control, but you may hear hissing or popping noises inside the refrigerator as it melts the ice into water and then hits the defrost heater in the freezer. Note that you cannot exit the mode by doing the same sequence again. You will have to let it run in timeout. You could potentially unplug it and plug it back in, but I did not try that to see if that would force the mode off during the time I shot this video. Once you wait, the compressor will turn back on again and it will return to normal operation, and you should be good to go with a more defrost refrigerator. Next, let me show you some of the potential error codes that could display on the UI, what they mean, and then how to address some of the issues with the teardown. This is the list of error codes that you could see on your UI system if there's an issue. There are 9 codes for this style of machine. Note the problems as explained here on what would cause the issues. Next, we'll also go over some basic diagnosis and teardown on the unit. This isn't super comprehensive, but it's so easy to work on that I can at least show you a few things while I'm filming this video. At the rear of this refrigerator is the main control board behind this cover. Use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the 2 screws at the top of the panel, then pivot away from the board. This is what the control board looks like. There are 2 slightly different styles, one for the units without the ice maker and one with, and they do have separate control boards. And how you diagnose them is slightly different between the models, but it's the same idea in general. With the panel off, let's go ahead and test the defrost circuit to see if the control board will be bad or if the heater is not working right. I have a multimeter here, and the first test we're going to do is to set it to AC voltage, and I have some very thin leads on the probes that will let me press into the circuit board without taking anything off. The wire harness with the bottom that has the thicker gauge wires has the defrost circuit on it. The wires you test are slightly different from model to model. For the style, which is what we have without the ice maker like this one, you're going to test between number 1 and number 7 on the wires here at the bottom. If you have the style with ice maker, it's number 2 and number 7. If the defrost heater was running in the forced defrost mode, you should get 120 volts AC or 240 volts if you live in a country with a higher voltage for running appliances. If you get way less than 120 or 140, then the board is likely bad, not sending the correct voltage to the defrost heater. You would test this when you're running the forced defrost mode on the refrigerator. You can test the defrost heater straight from the control board, but in order to do this, to test to see if it's working, you need to unplug power to the refrigerator. With the unit unplugged, go ahead and take the harness off, or you could potentially leave it on and set your meter to ohm resistance. Plug the leads of your multimeter into the same harness connectors that you tested for voltage, but with ohms resistance. If the heater is working properly, you should get about 60.1 ohms, and it would be plus or minus 10% of that number. So if it's below 54 or above 66, it needs replaced, but you see that this one tested fine at about 61 ohms. Next, with all the defrost heater tests out of the way, let's check the temperature sensors. This could tell you if one of your sensors is off value. If the sensors were bad, it would trick the control board into thinking that the refrigerator is too warm or too cold and then not run the compressor enough or run it too much and overfreeze. The sensors we're dealing with are in the wire harness at the very top of the board, and there should be two harnesses here. Either it'll be a 15-hole or 13-hole, and you'll see the various sensors etched on it with lettering. If the fridge is unplugged, you could unplug the harness if you like to make the notation look a little bit easier to see. This wasn't super easy to show on camera, but what you're going to do is set your multimeter to ohms resistance again, and if it's not auto ranging, it needs to be between 2 and 20,000 ohms or 20k ohms. Depending on your setup, you would press the leads of your multimeter in to see what ohm resistance you get on the sensors. And in order to figure out which ones to test for the leads, for units with the ice maker, one lead would go into number 12, and the others would go into 8, 9, or 10, depending on which sensor you want to test. If you have one without the ice maker, it would be 10, and then 5 or 6 for either of the freezer sensors, and then testing 7 and then 9 would be for the refrigerator sensor. All these sensors are going to have the same test range to know if it's good or bad. This is the chart that will show you the correct ohm value for the internal temperature of your fridge. In our case, the multimeter is around 5,500 ohms, which means the inside of the fridge is roughly 38 degrees in the refrigerator portion, which is correct. Now, if that was very far off from what we should have seen on the ohm value, then it would mean that the sensor needs to be replaced. Now, if you find that the control board wasn't sending the correct voltage to the defrost heater, or you think there's any other issues with the main board, I'm going to have links to the replacement boards for this style refrigerator in the description. There is a different board, again, for the one with and without the ice maker, and I'll include them in the bottom of the description. Next, I'm going to show you how to access the evaporator at the bottom of the unit in the freezer, as well as to get to anything else in the freezer compartment. First, open the bottom drawer and remove the baskets. To do this, move them as far forward as you can and simply lift up to pivot them up and out. The top drawer rail may prevent you from pulling the bottom basket, so one thing you may want to do is slide the top rails rearward, and you also may want to open the top refrigerator door to give you more room to remove the bottom basket. Next, there's a Phillips head screw on each side of the rails near the front like you see here. Use your screwdriver to remove them, and then once both screws are removed, pivot the bottom of the door up and away. Note there are fingers on the rear of the bracket that will pivot up to remove the door, and we'll show this a little bit better or more clearly when we reinstall it. The rail guide can then be removed by taking the small plastic locking tab out with a flat-bladed screwdriver, then pushing the rod to the right, and then remove it from the left side cog and then fully away. Sometimes this can get out of alignment that causes the drawer not to open properly. There are 3 screws that hold the panel in place. The bottom in the middle, then the left, then the right. Take a Phillips head screwdriver again and remove each of the 3. Once you have all 3 removed, you're going to pull at the bottom of the panel forward, and then it should dislodge itself downward and away from the evaporator in the back. You'll need to pull the rail glides from the back so you have more room, as the panel can remove itself quite a bit, which will expose the wire harnesses in the upper right corner. The yellow one on the far right does not actually need unplugged because it's to the defrost heater. You want to remove the other 2 to the left and then the middle, and then once those are out, you can fully remove this panel and you have total access to the freezer evaporator system in like 2 minutes. Really easy to get to. Then you can inspect or replace the defrost heater and sensors as needed, and we've already tested those from the control board so we would know what was wrong without having to take a multimeter to any of these things inside the freezer. Know that the defrost sensor is tied into the evaporator here in the cabinet, and judging by the harness housing, it may be connected to the defroster as a complete package, so it's not separate. I will have a link to the replacement in the description if you need to buy the defrost heater. You can then inspect or replace the fan and the panel as needed. The evaporator panel here houses the freezer temp sensor and the fan, and to remove it you would have to unclip the sides of the panel and it comes off like a clamshell. You could also test the sensor from here as well. To reinstall the panel after service, simply place it back into the housing and then reattach the wire harnesses in place as needed. Once you have the wires back in place, you can slide the panel up and into place. There's a little bit of a recess in the very back top that the panel will nestle into, so if you have a little bit of difficulty, it needs to pivot up and rearward as much as possible and then press the bottom into the rear of the freezer. Hopefully that makes sense. Once you have that done, reinsert the 3 screws and you now have that panel back on. Insert the drawer rail glide. Next, go ahead and put the door on. Remember the 2 fingers at the rear of the door that will need slid to the guide. I tried to show this earlier, but the focus isn't always the best. I hope you get an idea on how these fit in. And again, these are on both sides of the drawer rails. Once you have that aligned, you can put the screws back in and then go ahead and put the baskets back in. Note the notches on the rails. The bottom basket will seat on the notch that you see here. There's only one way that it can go. The upper basket's going to seat very similarly. There's a rear guide and then a front that it will seat onto, and hopefully the camera shows you how this is oriented. Again, note that the door to the fridge was open, making it easier to put this basket in for reference. Lastly, I want to show you how to get to the cover at the rear of the refrigerator to change the damper, as that is one other thing that could potentially go bad, causing your unit not to cool. The first step would be to remove the glass shelves from your refrigerator. They simply lift up and then slide out forward. They're all the same, including the one in the chef's pantry, which, by the way, the chef's pantry will pivot up and out identically to the freezer drawers. One screw then will hold the panel at the top. It's covered by a plastic cover that I had removed in an earlier video. Use a small flat-bladed screwdriver to remove that cover and then a Phillips head to remove the screw. Once you have the screw out, take your hand slightly and gently work the cover out and away from the right side and then the left. The whole panel should come off, but it's kind of two pieces with a styrofoam backing to the panel that could stick into place that you'll have to remove. There's only one wire harness on this type of unit, and that controls the damper system for reference. If you had to service the damper, it's in the bottom of the panel behind the sticky tape. You want to remove the tape and then pull and replace the damper, and I will have a link to it in the description for reference. The panel goes back on the same way. Put the wire harness on for the damper into the connector, then slowly work the panel back into place. Press the sides of the panel into the walls of the plastic. It will flex and pop into place. After that, install the screw and the screw cover. As a note, when we reinstalled the bottom shelf, the refrigerator temperature sensor was in the lower left corner hiding. If you had to replace it, well, that's where the cover is. The chef's pantry would seat back into the drawer glides, exactly like what happened with the bottom freezer drawers. The shelves simply slide back into place, like how we removed them earlier. And there you have it. There's pretty much everything you need on a HiSense bottom mount freezer refrigerator. I think the French doors are similar, but at least now you know. There are a few other things you can troubleshoot from the board, and there is a service manual for this. Maybe I will see if I can include it in the description. And again, all the different components that go on this refrigerator to replace it are going to have links in the description, and it does help the channel out if you use my links through iFixit or any of the other websites. Have a great day.